Are you an adventurer looking to take your hunt to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the East Meets West Hunt Podcast Mountain Buck Q&A edition, brought to you by Timber Ninja Outdoors. The way that these podcasts work are these are short 10 to 20 minute episodes where I dive into specific topics based on questions that you ask. So if you have any questions that you want to send in, you can send them to my email, beau@eastmeetswesthunt.com. Just put in the subject line, Mountain Buck Q&A, so I can go through and have these. Now, I'm not going to do these forever after December here. I'm going to stop doing them for a little while, but I will bring them back just because the popularity of them has been great and the feedback that I've been getting, which is kind of funny because I honestly didn't think that, I don't know, I wasn't really confident in doing these. When I'm doing these episodes by myself, it just, I'm literally talking to myself, so I feel like I'm missing things or I'm not explaining myself well. When I have a guest, I have time to think in between, and they bring up things that generate thoughts to me. But I've been trying to write down a bunch of notes and have things here in front of me so I can keep myself on track. But thank you for the feedback on it so far. Now this week, we're going to dive into one that has to do, there's some questions that came in about late season. So really even after the gun season is the way I'm going to categorize this. And you're getting into later in December and into January here about, where do you go during those time frames? What are the hot spots there? And honestly, there hasn't been a lot of years where I've had a buck tag in Pennsylvania. I've went to Ohio at this time of year. I've spent some time in PA, hunting does and stuff during this, and I've run trail cameras and scouted a bunch during it. So I'm going to give you my top 3 spots of where I've found where you can still have a chance at tagging a buck late season in the big woods based off of my experience here. So really, it can be tough when the hunting pressure of gun seasons are done with, and you've had all these hunters in the woods for the last 3 months. It's like, all right, what are these deer doing? But as you start getting into that late season, things start to settle down a little bit. Temperatures are starting to get colder, and these deer are ready to prepare, especially in the northern climates, for a tough winter, and to make sure that they're feeding on food. And honestly, first and foremost, it's no secret, but I'll say it anyways, cold weather will get deer on their feet earlier than in warmer type weather during that time period. So really you have to look at a little bit of a different strategy for being able to do that. So basically the first thing that I'll mention is food is king. And it's like, okay, what does food mean in the big woods? And it has a lot of similarities to the early season. I actually used the tactic based off of what I learned in the late season to kill my opening day buck in 2021, where this buck was feeding on a newer logging cut. But anyways, as deer are starting to burn more calories, trying to stay warm and need to eat to replenish those fats and carbohydrates. And the top food sources that I've personally found in late December and January are acorns, grasses, and browse that are commonly found in some newer logging cuts. So if there's still acorns on the ground, they seem to be the primary food source. In addition to acorns, a brand new logging cut might be my favorite late season food sources that are coming out, because there's so many different things in there. You've got briars, you've got grasses, you've got tops that are laying down. You've got a lot of things in one area. Now, specifically logging cuts that are just being logged. So these ones might not have the briars and everything, but literally after the skidders shut down for the day and they leave, you can find some good time where those deer will be in there even before the skidders are even shut off. I have a lot of buddies that are loggers, and it's just a magnet for those deer. And as they start to get used to them being in there working, they don't really look at them as a threat. So the fresh tops of the trees that they cut down are really, really good food sources. Those are at levels where they couldn't reach to browse before at different times during the year. So hunting the edges of these cuts can be extremely productive. Now, I like to find the logging cuts that are on the edge of thermal cover, which I'll get into that next. So thermal cover being hemlocks, pines, some sort of conifer tree that keeps their foliage year-round and provides a little bit of a windbreak and also almost like a blanket for heating. It's a little bit warmer underneath some of those places. Keep them out of the weather, essentially. Now, with acorns, a lot of the acorns are scooped up this time of year. Especially, it depends on what kind of crop that you had that year, but there are some trees that are producing, and I've said it in the past where, chestnut oaks are not my favorite acorns or oak trees to focus on in October, as it seems like the whites and the reds are preferred over the chestnuts in the areas that I've spent time in. Well, now a lot of those whites are gone and the reds are gone or are very little. That leaves some of these chestnut oak acorns available. So those are places that you can focus on. But if there is snow, you can just see where they're digging, walking through the woods, spending a day just going through and checking to see where they're feeding, where the feeding sign is, where they're digging at. I was just doing that during rifle season here, where there was an entire ridge that's covered in oak trees, and there was a few trees that were being dug up and hit. Now, that was kind of in the open, and there's a bunch of mountain laurel and rhododendron in this area, and the deer were living in there, and I don't think they're coming out in daylight. So you kind of have to get either in that cover a little bit or just on the edge of it. Now, with areas that have mountain laurel and rhododendron, a lot of times they'll have the oak trees mixed in it, so the deer don't need to come out and feed in the daylight. They can get up from their beds and move 100 yards or so within that thick cover and be able to eat. Now, that's really tough to be able to hunt, but it is doable. It's just kind of a high risk, high reward. Now, going to thermal cover, with the deer don't like to expose themselves just as much as we don't as humans, and the thermal cover, pine, cedar, spruce, hemlock, all that stuff acts as a weather break, and those deer will seek out those areas to be able to bed. And I will throw rhododendron and thicker areas of mountain laurel in there as well, even though that's not typically considered thermal cover, but that does act as a little bit of a windbreak, a little bit of a weather break in areas where that gets kind of thick. Now, hunting the edges of that thermal cover over a primary scrape on the way to a feeding area in the evening can be a really good ambush site. Scrapes are, traditionally thought of October and November type things, but primary scrapes are focal points really at any time of the year. That's no secret now either, as far as rubbing their forehead gland scents on the licking branches as after they're leaving their buck bedding location. And to be able to find where the bucks are bedding at this time of year, if there's snow, again, this makes this a lot easier. But finding tracks will tell you where they're hanging out at, where they're going. Now, if you find a big track in a wide open oak flat or just a wide open set of woods, follow it back, try to get in, figure out where they're bedding at. And traditionally that's going to have some thicker cover and some sort of a wind and thermal advantage to that. Now, the other place that I find my third option here is that I personally really like when it gets super cold is spring seeps in draws and on side hills. So as the ground begins to freeze in areas and the snow is starting to pile up, it becomes harder for the deer to browse on the grasses and other food sources that are lying close to the ground because they can't dig it because of ice and frozen ground there. So water becomes more scarce to find too, and most standing water is being frozen over. Spring seep's coming out of the side of the hills and the middle of a draw, which is just a small valley going up between two points or hills of the ridge, essentially. Those places are the last to freeze, and they're also the first to thaw, which is where I tend to find quite a few sheds in these areas as well. The grasses and plants in and around those spring seeps stay greener longer and provide some food and water all in one location. If you find an oak tree that has a good acorn crop around a spring seep, that's the absolute perfect case scenario, because they can get to those acorns without having to work really hard and use a lot of energy to be able to do that. So setups around these areas coincide with the terrain and vegetation cover in that area that is really most attractive to bucks in daylight hours. Again, it all comes down to, for me, is thinking, what is a buck going to feel comfortable moving through in daylight hours, if that's what you're focusing on. So the exact positioning of the setups can depend on the weather. You can get away with hunting right on the food sources when it's really cold and if they're getting up early. But when it's warmer, that can be pretty tough. And on those warmer weather days, staying tight to bedding or wait it out until you get the cold weather front that you come through. I know at that time of year, you typically don't have as many days available to hunt, depending on what you do for a living, but you may have used up your vacation days, or it's at the beginning of the year and you're wanting to save them for later during the rut and your traditional hunting seasons. So trying to pick and choose when you can do that, or if you only have Saturdays, and if you're in a state other than Pennsylvania and you can hunt Sundays, then you kind of have to use what you have to work with there. But in the late season, I'm spending more time scouting and looking for where that fresh feeding sign is, more so than anything else. And I will throw a bonus spot in here. If you have areas, and a lot of the areas I hunt don't have this, but I know in some other states, a lot of the big state forests, game lands, national forests, whatever type of public land it is surrounded by having private lands, either in the bottoms or sometimes on the tops, and they might have cornfields or some sort of ag that is still available. If you can have that and you can get on the towards the fringes of it, that can be an absolute magnet. We had that scenario last year in Ohio, and when a buddy of mine, Jake, who was on the podcast before, Jake Belinda, he had shot a buck down there in a late muzzleloader season in Ohio, and that's what that buck was doing. It was going to be heading down to an uncut cornfield that was still left up, but it was bedding little ways onto the public and had some thick briars and greenbrier and everything, thermal cover right there available. Kind of get in between there, your traditional kind of bed to feed pattern. So late season can be good. I haven't spent, like I said, a whole lot of time doing it, but if at the time of recording this, if don't get something here in this last few days of rifle season, then I may be in that position myself. So anyways, I hope that helped you out. If you have any questions, you want to send them in to my email, like I said, boateastmeetswesthunt.com. Would love to be able to answer these questions, and if I don't get to them at this time, I'm saving all of these, so when I start doing these Q&As again, I can pull from some of them and be able to bring them up. But with that being said, I hope you have a great weekend, and if you are in Pennsylvania, your last weekend of gun season here, good luck, stay safe, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.